Just quick intro to today's event, the fourth trimester. Get to know your vagina, your mind, your body postpartum. So my name is Judy Chen. I'm a proud member of the Auggie community and moderator for today's conversation. So important, overdue. We need to talk about this. I wish that this was something that I had thought about my first time around. So whether you're in the fresh postpartum period now, you're still preparing for birth, you belong in this space. Before we dive into today's conversation, just a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. It will be made available afterwards. We encourage you to drop questions in the chat throughout the session. We're going to hold them until the end and see how many we can get through. So don't be shy. You know, this is the space to ask these questions. And yes, you are absolutely welcome to eat snacks, multitask, feed your baby, keep your camera off, do what you got to do. We hope that you take away a lot from this conversation, and it is a judgment-free zone. So let's get started by meeting our incredible panelists today. So first, we have Dr. McLean, OB-GYN and Chief Medical Officer at EVI, championing data-driven, patient-centered postpartum care. Then we also have Dr. Sarah Orrick, reproductive psychiatrist, founder of Libido Health, focused on transforming maternal mental health care. And then last but certainly not least, Dr. Jada Meadows, pelvic floor PT at Origin, specializing in evidence-based recovery strategies for new parents. So I love that this covers a lot of ground. So again, whatever stage that you all are in, please feel free to drop in the chat so we know a little bit about you. So we are going to ask some of the important questions up front to make sure we cover enough ground. But again, if you drop questions in the chat, I'll make sure that we cover them at the end. So Dr. McLean, you are up first. What would you say are the most common like postpartum changes that OB-GYNs see? Like especially those that parents are never warned about? What would you consider normal? What's a red flag?
Sure. So, since especially the theme of today is focusing a little bit on vaginal health, I'm going to start there. One of the most common things we see our patients experience in the vaginal discharge type of space postpartum is I think people know that they're going to have what feels like a heavy period after they give birth. But I think oftentimes what people don't realize is how long that can actually last. So the discharge will at first be heavy and bright red and will kind of taper off over time, but it can become kind of pink and watery, and we call that discharge something called lochia. And I think a lot of people don't realize it's totally normal for lochia to last as long as 6 weeks. And so that can be unexpected to folks. They're like, wait, I thought I was going to have like a heavy period after I gave birth, but I didn't realize I was going to have this lochia stuff for like maybe 6 weeks, and that's totally normal. So people are dealing with, period hygiene products and things just, I think, longer than they might expect initially. And then what's also happening around that same time is due to hormonal changes after the birth, we can also see thinning and drying of the vaginal tissue. So as estrogen goes down after the birth, and as prolactin, especially if people are breastfeeding, goes up, that sort of combination of hormonal changes can mean that the vaginal tissue becomes thinner and it can actually become a bit drier. So let's say that your lochia is tapered off by 6 weeks, and then you're thinking, okay, I feel like I should be totally back to normal here, and maybe you're considering things like intercourse postpartum, but that vaginal tissue can be really dry, and that can be normal. And so in terms of what's a red flag, just to dive into that a little bit, if the lochia is lasting longer than 6 weeks, definitely worth connecting with your provider. If it's really heavy, like you're soaking through a pad in less than an hour, that's also not normal and something you should talk to your provider about.
Yeah, I was definitely not prepared for the dryness postpartum my first time around. So thank you so much for making that distinction. So we often hear about like that magical 6 week mark. What is one thing that you wish every parent knew before their 6 week checkup?
Sure. I think that this 6 week mark is relatively arbitrary. So I think a lot of people think, well, I should be fully recovered by this 6 week mark. And the reality is that's just not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are still dealing with fatigue, with healing, sometimes with pain, and that can be normal, and sometimes that's not normal. It depends on the situation. But your body is still going through changes. Your body is still working really hard at that point. And so I think a lot of people are like, oh, by the 6 week mark, I should kind of be over this major hump. And the reality is that's not always true for everybody. And so we just have to be patient with our bodies as, our bodies are going through a really big transformation still at that stage. And then as an OB-GYN, I think we also we never want people to be surprised. And so, while for many people, intercourse is the last thing on their minds by the 6 week postpartum mark, for lots of reasons, that is also not true for everybody. But then I've dealt with a lot of patients who don't realize that they can actually get pregnant as soon as 4 weeks after they give birth. And so I've diagnosed a number of patients who are, with pregnancy in that like 6 to 8 week time frame. And so you just never want somebody to be surprised. So even though that's not on most people's minds, for the rare person, if it is on your mind, just know, talk to your provider about contraceptive methods and things like that if you don't want to be pregnant again right away. And we would say for many health reasons, it's optimal to space your pregnancies longer than that, to give your body that time to recover, to replete its nutritional stores, to get ready for another pregnancy. So we just don't want anybody to be surprised. And I've seen a lot of surprised patients in my office, more than you would expect.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. I feel like it wasn't until I had my first where I started seeing viral posts of those rare scenarios, and those folks are speaking up and saying, making funny videos about it later, right? But that initial shock, very scary. Dr. Orix, coming over to you. So, we've talked a bit more about the physical side. Let's talk about the mental health side. How do we distinguish between baby blues and the more serious mental health conditions like postpartum depression or anxiety, which I had, but I wasn't diagnosed until maybe like 6 months after?
I know that's really tough because I think we talk about and it's great to kind of universalize things, but it's also okay and we have to be careful to not normalize things of like, you have to get through this on your own. So baby blues happens to about 85% of people who give birth, so it's incredibly common. It happens within the first 2 weeks of delivering. The peak is at like 5 days postpartum, and what we notice is like a lot of lability. So that means that at one point you're experiencing a lot of joy and, oh my God, I'm so happy. And then next you're really tearful and you're like, I have no idea where this swell of emotion is coming from. Again, very common. Doesn't necessarily have to be treated by a psychiatrist or a therapist. I think it's really important to have the support systems to understand and have the language to know what's happening. What the big differentiator is if these symptoms linger on for more than 2 weeks, or during these first 2 weeks, you're already having severe hopelessness, wishes of not wanting to be alive, wishes that you don't aren't the right mom for this baby. And what we really think about when it crosses over to postpartum depression or anxiety is this sense of like during baby blues, you're like, oh, this is really hard. And I can't believe like the baby isn't sleeping, but I know in a couple months we'll be good, right? Things will change. When you start to have this sense of hopelessness that nothing's going to get better, is when I start to have like my spidey sense that something else may be going on. But really, what we think about clinically is if it crosses that 2 weeks, if you're having a great deal of intrusive thoughts that you're not able to kind of do the things you wanted to do. And intrusive thoughts are images that come into your mind. They can be really scary for some people. For example, like one that I always have, I have 3 children, and this one never seems to go away, is like I'm going down the stairs and I'm going to drop them, and something terrible is going to happen. And in some ways, there's something protective in our brains biologically. It's like this real fight or flight. Our amygdala is like wired to like see every danger in the environment. But for some people, it can become so overwhelming. So they don't go down the stairs with their baby, or they won't bathe their baby, or they won't drive in a car with their child. And those kinds of things can really inhibit your quality of life. And so I think it's really important to start to look there. And of course, if you're having symptoms that are keeping you in bed, are keeping you from doing the things and how you imagined, the kind of mother you would be, those are certainly things to get care for. And I think get care earlier than you think you need is always what I say. If you can touch base with someone before, even during your pregnancy, even if you don't have very many symptoms. But I have to say, we think close to 50% of cases of postpartum depression or anxiety may actually start earlier in the pregnancy. So really important to get kind of that team or that care established, and for you to just have them just in case, right? And that's what we do with Mavita Health. We often see people during pregnancy who may be symptom free, but they have us, they're in our care, so then they can come back to us and see what's going on. And also, just a comment about 6 weeks, nothing happens at 6 weeks. It is very arbitrary. It's not the time where you need to be ready to have sex again. And I think it's really important about like laying down those expectations with your partner and yourself, that like 6 weeks isn't a magic number. You may feel healed in terms of your sort of physical health 6 months later or a year later. And the postpartum, though we think about it as just 1 year after childbirth, we're starting to see more studies that say that the psychological effects, the hormonal effects may actually extend out like 3 to 5 years. So even that concept that we have of like postpartum just being a year isn't necessarily the case. And so I think that's really important in how you view yourself and sort of softening around some expectations you may have of where you should be.
Thank you for saying all that. I think that what I'm doing differently with my second pregnancy is recognizing like I really, instead of stressing myself out, thinking about all the prep for baby, I'm just like investing in myself, my maternal mental health, and finding support groups, and that's been really helpful. But for anybody who might be on the call and is not necessarily the birthing parent, or is somebody supporting somebody who's going to go through this, what signs would a loved one kind of look out for to, you talked about the 2 week kind of distinction, but like something's a little bit off, and then I might need to nudge this person to like consider getting help, and I don't know what that looks like, but this
I
might not be normal.
Yeah, I think what's really important, if you're right, if you're not the birthing parent, but even if you're the non-birthing parent, and let's say you're the birthing parent, non-birthing parents can also have postpartum depression and anxiety. They have brain changes as they have a baby too. So fathers have about a 1 in 10 chance of having some kind of depressive episode after having a baby, and that's really important to think about as well. But I think when you approach the mental health of your partner or a loved one, it's really important to start with curiosity. I've noticed this is happening. Tell me what you think is going on versus you're depressed and you need help. That is like, one is going to be received in a very different way versus the other one feels judgmental. And there's still a great deal of stigma around mental health, as much as I wish that wasn't the case. It is the case, especially in certain cultures. And so I think approach everything with curiosity. I noticed that you don't want to drive with the baby in the car. Can you tell me what's going on there? And that feels right, like I'm asking what's happening versus projecting like a narrative on top of, you're anxious, you can't get in the car, what are you going to do, right? Like, again, the like curiosity versus accusation, I think, is a really good place to start. But I think it's also important to say, hey, this happened to my friend and here's what it is, or this happened to me, here's my experience. And like and offering resources once that person is open and ready. But I think it's really hard when you see someone is really suffering and they may not be ready. But I think holding tight and just like being with them, supporting, again, continuing the curiosity without the judgment is the best way to get a loved one into care.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot because, we can be extra sensitive, and one little thing I might take it as you are saying I'm a bad parent, and that's not the case. Just I'm noticing these things. So thank you. Okay, Dr. Meadows, coming over to you. So I'm definitely thinking about my pelvic floor this time around because I did not think about that when I had my first. So for many parents, reconnecting with their body postpartum just feels really daunting. Like, where can they start? How can PT support healing, both physically and emotionally?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the best place to start is just giving yourself grace. And I think out of all the patients that I've treated, knowing that it does not have to be all or nothing when we're talking about movement or exercise postpartum, it feels like there's a lot of pressure to get back, to normal with exercise or with your routine. But a lot of my patients, I think the biggest barrier is feeling like I don't have time for a full workout, or I don't have time, to set aside 45 minutes to go for a run or go to the gym or something. And you don't need that to be able to kickstart movement and mobility and strength. You need 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I always ask my patients, like, what can you give me during the day? Do you have a couple of moments, when your baby might be asleep? Do you have a couple of moments when you're, at the sink washing bottles and you can do some heel raises? So I think a lot of postpartum PT is kind of being creative and figuring out how we can incorporate movements and exercise into patients' lives already. Everybody's postpartum life is going to look different. And so everybody's physical recovery is going to look different too. So just know it doesn't need to be all or nothing. You don't have to have 45 minutes or an hour set aside to start movement or moving. Do you have 2 minutes to do, 4 stretches for 30 seconds? Do you have 5 minutes to do 2 exercises like squats or sit-ups or something like that? So yeah, I think the knowing that you don't have to have a ton of time set aside, especially initially, is really important. Secondly, breathing is like the number one form of defense basically for a lot of postpartum things that come down the line, like pain, pelvic floor issues. If you can breathe through the activities you're doing, so when you're lifting or lowering your baby in and out of the crib, putting your baby in and out of the car seat, even getting in and out of bed, don't hold your breath for those things. It's something that we don't necessarily notice because it's so subconscious for all of us to just hold our breath. But you'll notice once you start paying attention that in a lot of those instances, especially when you're lifting or lowering something, whether it's a baby, a car seat, crib, something like that, you hold your breath. And that really ends up taking away a lot of potential for recovery and for strength in your pelvic floor and in your core. So if you can exhale through the harder part of the movement, like exhale as you're picking your baby up out of the crib, or exhale as you're lowering them back down, that will really, really help to curb a lot of symptoms down the road. Secondly, using your deep core muscles. Instead of focusing more on the six-pack muscles, we really want to engage your transverse abdominis, or your deep, low core muscles. If you exhale and draw your belly button back towards your spine when you're getting in and out of bed, or again, lifting your baby, that acts like a support belt for your whole lower trunk. So it's really giving a lot of relief and support to your low back, your mid back, your core, and your whole body. So those are 2 things, just breathing and gently contracting your abs through activities that can really, really help you in those early postpartum days when you might not have time for a lot of other exercise. If you're lifting and lowering your baby dozens of times throughout the day, every single time you do that, you're engaging your core and you're breathing. It saves you a lot of strain on your back and on your body throughout the day. So those are the 2 biggest things. And the next is just watching your body mechanics. So if you're always carrying your baby on one side, that can start to take a toll on one side of your body. If you are trying to bring your baby to you when you're feeding them, instead of trying to support the baby up to you, or not go down to the baby, but bring the baby to you. Those are always little things throughout the day that can really help to protect your body. So most of it is not, carving out a lot of time for a workout. It's the little things that you do a ton of times throughout the day and trying to make sure that you're in the best position to do those. That's the most helpful.
I feel so encouraged. I thought I might be starting the pelvic floor stuff too late this pregnancy. I'm going to set reminders to do this a few times throughout the day. But
Yeah.
as a follow up, you spent a lot of time talking about the postpartum part, but how does pelvic floor care differ between postpartum and pre-baby in case somebody else is like me and pregnant currently?
Yeah, totally. So, pre-baby, we're doing a lot of preparation, a lot of trying to maintain strength, minimize future aches and pains. And especially in the later parts of pregnancy, we're doing a lot to try to manage your symptoms. At the end of pregnancy, there might not be a way to completely take away a certain symptom that you have because of the fact that you are pregnant. And right now, that's not changing. And so a lot of it is really trying to maintain and just minimize the symptoms you're currently experiencing. And then postpartum is a really exciting time because we have so much more potential for strength gains and growth and just results. So there's much less of a ceiling, it feels like, in the results that you can achieve postpartum. So we're focusing a lot more on like gaining a lot of strength and motor control and muscle awareness, improving your activity tolerance and helping make baby tasks easier to do. So it can feel a lot more rewarding because you can see a little bit more progress. I think sometimes towards the end of a pregnancy, because it feels like there's kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, it can feel frustrating that you can't completely get rid of a certain symptom. But that's why I love the postpartum period so much with physical therapy. It's because the sky's the limit with recovery.
Thank you. Okay, so back to you, Dr. McLean. What physical conditions might impact the libido or comfort after birth? Let's just talk about sex here.
Sure. We OB-GYNs love to talk about sex. So I think first is just some of the very direct healing that happens after you give birth. If you've had a vaginal birth, you might have had a tear in the vagina that has stitches or needs to heal. And while typically the vagina heals extremely quickly overall and does very well in this healing process, that scar or that torn area, even if it is completely healed, and the sutures have dissolved, it can still feel sensitive. And so that's something that can be a factor in intercourse. If, on the other hand, you've had a C-section birth, that scar also does typically a pretty good job healing over the first 6 weeks of recovery. But that scars can also still be sensitive, can, maybe feel uncomfortable if there's direct pressure placed on it, or when you're using your abdominal muscles to kind of move into a position that's comfortable for intercourse, can also be somewhat of an issue. And so, like Dr. Meadows said, just being patient, and giving your body that time to heal. If you have really sharp or persistent pain, though, talking with your birth provider, potentially talking with your physical therapist about it, can be really helpful. So that's one of the biggest factors. Second is that many folks are really sleep deprived and tired. And so, of course, like that can have an impact on the desire for intimacy, on the timing of intimacy, even on sometimes how you perceive your partner. Like when you're really exhausted, I think it's much easier to see your partner's flaws. And I think the postpartum period can just be a period that is defined by exhaustion for both people. And so also just giving yourself patience, as Dr. Orick said, knowing this is going to change and it's going to evolve over time. Like many people's partnerships, marriages, they go through these seasons. And this is potentially one of those seasons where intimacy is new, different, sometimes more challenging, but that doesn't mean that this is always the way that it's going to be. And then lastly, we had touched on some of the hormonal changes that happen. So that lowering of estrogen, if you're breastfeeding, that increased prolactin level can suppress ovarian activity, which also can then suppress libido. And then some of the other downstream effects of that can be kind of unexpected as well. With that lowering of estrogen, with that drying of the vaginal tissue that comes along with it, not only might you have some increased sort of dryness, maybe discomfort and friction with intercourse, but one of the downstream effects also with that lowering of hormones is that the microbiome, so the makeup of bacteria in the vagina, fundamentally changes. So the bacteria that helps the vagina to stay the most healthy is a category called lactobacillus. And this particular type of bacteria feeds on glycogen, and estrogen levels increase glycogen. So when those levels fall postpartum, what that means is you're going to have fewer of those protective bacteria in your vagina. What that can lead to is an increased risk for vaginal infection too, and that can of course impact intimacy. If you're having itching, if you're having burning, if your discharge has become, odorous in any way, these are all warning signs that you might have an infection, which people are more prone to postpartum. And sometimes people are really noticing that at the moment of intimacy. You're so busy otherwise, and then when you're thinking about intimacy, you're like, wait, I actually have had vaginal burning and maybe some odor. What's going on here? So just know that there is an increased chance of that postpartum. And while those hormonal changes are technically normal, getting an infection in the vagina postpartum is not normal and is something that does require treatment. So we at Evie are focused on at-home vaginal microbiome testing where we diagnose these types of infections. So we do, if you think that you might have an infection, especially when you're considering intimacy, think about seeing your provider or do an Evie test, but look into it and don't just let it linger, because those infections can cause complications down the road if they're not treated.
Thank you. So another part of sex with the intimacy, Dr. Orick, how do mood, identity, mental health affect intimacy in this phase? We heard all the sexy stuff with your vaginal microbiome. What about the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those things, the physical aspects of it, the lack of libido, for example, if you are breastfeeding, I think those are all really important in kind of understanding where you're at. Because I think often we are, or women I'm speaking about, are kind of their sexuality and how we talk about sexuality is often through a male lens of kind of desire and that you should just want to have sex. But unfortunately or fortunately, women have a little bit of a different interest in sex in the sense of what we call spontaneous desire. So about 85% of men have spontaneous desire. And what we kind of think about that is you see a naked body and immediately you're turned on, you're ready to go. But that's inverted in women. And so about only 15% of women have that spontaneous desire where they're able to kind of just like see a hot body or image and they're ready to go. So that means that the other 85% kind of get into things in a different way. That means it's mostly in their brain, that it's the actions that kind of lead to that moment, everything that happens outside of the bedroom that leads up to that moment of intimacy. So the biological stuff is happening, but also this distribution of invisible load is happening. And even in the most modern couples, and I'm talking mostly about heterosexual couples, but actually sometimes in homosexual couples as well, you have this like you used to split up the laundry and the dishes and it was no problem. But all of a sudden, when it comes to having a baby, that it's like very misaligned, where a lot of the responsibility is on mom. Every pediatrician appointment, when the formula comes, when the diapers come, the breastfeeding schedule. And so I think that really topples the desire for intimacy, especially if we think about women having this intimacy that kind of occurs outside of the bedroom, right? The connecting with the brain, the making me feel like I have support, like you're thinking of me, like I'm special, like, you know, and you have to identify in some ways what turns you on. What do you need in this moment? Do you just need some more hours of sleep? Well, how can your partner get you that so then you can maybe have more interest in sex, right? It's like this really interesting thing of like maybe if you were cared for a little bit more or if you had some help with the mental load. So it's this really interesting thing that kind of just like goes into all the other aspects. Like it's so funny that mental load is a huge part of like sex and sexual desire, but it is. So I think there's a lot on that and also how the expectations around women and sex. And I think it's a really interesting time because your body has changed, your hormones have changed, and a lot of people don't understand what they want in sex. They've been sort of taught by society what they should do or what they, you know, and I think in some ways that's around a lot around the male gaze. And so I think it's really important to kind of think about what do I like? What do I want? Some curiosity around that. And also building language with your partner around what feels good, what doesn't feel good. I'm seeing people are going to ask questions about pelvic floor therapy and third-degree tears, but like when you have a third-degree tear, some things aren't going to feel good or some things may have to change. And I think it's hard for a lot of couples to have those conversations of like maybe penetration isn't right, but there's a lot of other things that you can do until sort of your pelvic floor heals. So I think it's open conversation. It's thinking about the whole picture because it's often not, it's not that I don't find you attractive. It's that I am so overwhelmed and sleep deprived that this is the last thing on my mind. It's also, some people are really touched out. They've had a lot of touching from their babies, from their toddlers. And it's really difficult to kind of make that transition of using your body for, sex and pleasure. But I think that often has to do with like, well, then it seems like you are doing so much of the caretaking that you don't have a moment for your body to kind of be your own, and so that's again another reflection of like, is there an imbalance in the caretaking?
Yeah, thank you for naming that. I think definitely it's like the mental load, but then also you have to be self-aware. You have to be able to communicate. Intimacy is supposed to be this beautiful thing, and you just want to get some extra sleep in, but you wanted to do something nice for your partner, and now you realize you're not feeling it. So it's definitely a lot of that is connected.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, okay, I want to move things along because I see that some questions are coming through. This is for all the panelists, but we'll start with you, Dr. Meadows. Many parents feel they leave the hospital and are suddenly alone. What types of providers and community supports do you believe every postpartum parent deserves?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think baseline, like you deserve any type of support that you want or feel like you need. I think there's so many types of support available that sometimes it can be overwhelming to know like what things to prioritize or what things to choose. And a lot of different levels of support have a financial component too. So sometimes there is a limit to what you feel like you can add onto your plate, and that is totally fair. Of course, I'm biased. I think that pelvic floor PT is a really, really awesome tool to have. But I think one of the best parts about pelvic floor PT and physical therapy in general is that we're not trying to keep you forever. As much as, we love to treat you, we want you to come get better and then be good to go on your own. So PT is something that we aren't trying to keep you in for a really long time. It's just as long as you need to meet your goals. So it is something that is very, specific to you. And I think it's a really, really great tool to have, even if you just want to come in and check in on things that you can be doing by yourself, or check in on, at baseline how you're doing postpartum. I think can be a really good tool. I refer patients to therapy all the time. I think that having a therapist to be able to prioritize your mental and emotional well-being is so, so, so important. Your mental and emotional health, your mental, emotional, and physical health are all so, so intertwined. You can't have, perfect physical health without having also good emotional and mental health. So I cannot recommend therapy enough. I think especially when something so huge in your life has changed, like having a baby, being able to have somebody to support you. And, when most of the attention a lot of times is on the baby, someone that's here specifically for just you is so, so important. So there's a bunch of other providers that I think are important. I recommend people to go to acupuncturists and massage therapists and lactation consultants all the time too. But therapy has got to be the biggest one that I recommend for people.
Thank you. Dr. McLean, how about you? What types of providers, community supports do you believe every postpartum parent needs to have in their support system?
I think that most parents need more support than the traditional healthcare system gives them. So if, say, you have a vaginal birth, you might not have an appointment with your OB-GYN until 6 weeks after that birth. So you might not have another interaction with them. If you've had a C-section birth, typically you'll have an appointment more like 1 week and then another appointment at the 6 week mark. But for most birthing people, that 6 weeks is like an eon without having an interaction with your provider. Now, if you've had a midwife for your birth, you might have interactions much sooner than that, and that is really fantastic. I love how a lot of midwives schedule their postpartum touch points and their care points. But in the really traditional healthcare system, so most babies are birthed with OB-GYNs in this country. That 6 week period can just feel like this care desert. And it's just unfortunate that the system works that way. So I really want to call that out and say that is really suboptimal. And where I see a lot of patients really needing a lot of support is if they're choosing to breastfeed, chest feed, having that support in place, because that can be one of the most technically challenging and emotionally frustrating things that very competent adults ever have to face. And so having lactation support through the form of an IBCLC, so a board certified lactation consultant specialist, can be super helpful. And many times insurance does cover that. And so seeking out those resources for that kind of coverage can be really important for folks. The other thing, and there is becoming some spotty sort of insurance coverage for this. It varies by plan, it varies dramatically by state, but at least there's this trend in the right direction, is coverage of doula care. And people think of doula care as being a birth support professional who is there for a couple visits prenatally and then there during the active labor and birth portion of the pregnancy. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's typical for doulas to have at least a couple of postpartum visits. And I think that can be really, really helpful because doulas are also postpartum experts. So they're experts in everything about like, okay, how is your recovery as the birthing person going to how would I expect your baby to be feeding right now? What's normal? What's not normal? They have a really broad range of expertise. And then there can even be overnight doulas. So let's say that you just need a break. Some doulas will do overnight work where they will just feed your baby in the middle of the night for you. Typically, that's an extra, something that you pay for by the hour. But for people who do have the means for that or the insurance coverage for that, that can just be so meaningful to have that type of extra support. Because again, I really want to acknowledge that the traditional healthcare system really fails new parents, especially in that first 6 weeks.
And if I can just say something to that, yes, it's very important to say like this is a privileged kind of thing that some people can have, but I will say that it's also about how you use your resources. Many people are focused on I have to get the really expensive crib, or I have to get that really nice, $700 stroller. Well, think about it, because you could potentially use that to take care of yourself, which we know is a better and sort of more sustainable investment than the fancy, snoo or crib or whatever that costs $2,000. So I think it's also about our culture starting to kind of think about, is it the things that are going to make me like ready to be a mother and like the right nursery items? And the answer to that is no. Babies don't need very much. And what we need more of is the support. I will guarantee you that the investment in a doula will be a more worthwhile investment than any fancy crib, anything like that. Like you can get a nice crib at Target for $50. There are so many, I mean, pack and plays also work, frankly. Like if you are really thinking, how can I distribute these resources? I would urge you to kind of think about less swag, more stuff for yourself.
And there are also community doula programs for people who can't afford doulas, and they often do a really amazing job matching people on the first language that they speak or other backgrounds, such that the care is culturally congruent and super meaningful to people. So that is also an option. And then within certain communities, there are sometimes members of the community who will step in and do this on an informal basis. And so plugging into your community, looking at what resources are there can help scale this. If you take a look and think, gosh, my insurance doesn't cover this and it is really expensive, there may be other paths forward.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so encouraged because for my first, I didn't have a doula and I only knew one person in my network who had a doula. And I was like, it feels like this rare unicorn experience. And I was like, do I need it this time around? I'm getting a doula. So thank you. I'm at peace with that decision. But Dr. Orrick, talk to us a bit more about who you feel like postpartum parents need to have in their support system to kind of round out this part of the conversation.
I think it's about normalizing or talking more about even though it's the American model to kind of have a baby either on your own or with just your partner, like that is just not a sustainable model. And this is why we see people having to pay for doulas or night nurse. But frankly, if you have any family that you think can step up or can be a part of this, see how you can make it work. See if you can fly them out or they can fly themselves out and be with you and take turns. I know it's really hard to deal with mother-in-laws, for example, mine can be a nightmare, but I am able to think about can I set some of this aside, some of the momsplaining, some of the control, because I just need help. And I just want to sleep and I just want a minute to myself to be able to be in the shower and not have my kids run in there. can we kind of say, is this worth it to me? Can I somehow make this work? Because it's really a family systems thing. Like, we were meant to kind of raise children in villages with more support. For example, like a lot of very religious communities do this, where like one day all the kids come to my house and the other house. I worked in like the Washington Heights area and got to see some, like a lot of Mormon families and Orthodox families. And I was really kind of taken aback by how much they would help one another in this like village. I mean, they have a lot of children, but like I think that's the only way to make it work in these kind of cities and with when people have both parents have jobs. And so I think it's really of like, who can you take in? But this also means when you're up, when your sister's having a baby or when your friend's having a baby, how can you model that, where you come over and do some laundry, where you come over and bring something to eat? Like, how can we show up more for one another? Because I think it's really hard. And of course it's hard because a lot of people move away from their families. But I think kind of bringing that family system, or the fact that like it takes a village, is a really important notion. We're doing some of the patchwork by like paying for it, but I think it's more of a community effort.
Yeah, I think after I had my first, receiving meal trains, I think that is like the best gift. And people who aren't bringing the meal over and expecting to like hold the baby and like catch up
Yes.
with you, they're just like, I'm
Like,
gonna
don't
leave
even
it
come
at your
over,
door.
just bring the food. And also like, don't ask me what I want. Like, if you've ever eaten with me and you know that I'm, like if you know someone's gluten free, we'll do that. But like, just approximate, like go to the like top choices in a restaurant, like what gets 90% on Uber Eats, and like you'll be fine. I think it's don't make the load bigger for the person if
Yes.
you are doing something for them.
Yes, I feel that. Well, okay, to close out the more structured part of our panel, we've got a couple questions in the chat. I'd love for each of you to share, whoever wants to go first. Can you speak to your experience as a provider or as a parent? What is one thing that helps moms survive those early postpartum weeks?
Ask for help. Ask for help. There's no, and I think as someone who is academic, like a little bit of a perfectionist, I thought like, I'm gonna get an A as a mom. Like, I have to like figure it out and I'm gonna know exactly what to do. Well, I'm telling you, I've had 3 kids now. Like, there's no, not even at the third. You're not like, you don't figure it out, because these are all different types of human beings. So I think it's like, you're not getting a grade. There's no extra brownie points for like doing it all yourself or figuring it all out. Like, none of that. Really, like, ask for help wherever you can, even if you think you can do it perfectly, because I think this is why we kind of run ourselves into the ground, and frankly why there's so much postpartum depression or anxiety, is these expectations that you somehow have to do this all on your own, which is like not sustainable. It's not good for you. I certainly see so many people who are like, no, I have to do all of the feedings, I always have to change the baby, I always have to bathe the baby. And it's also this loosening of like, well, your partner or your mother-in-law or someone else may do it, and they may not do it exactly how you want. They may dress them in an outfit you don't like. Kind of like letting go of some of that control, and like, it's okay.
I think finding somebody to talk to as best you can who has a similar experience to your own. Like, I became a stepmom to a teenager, and talking to other stepmoms who had kind of been brought into a child's life at a different stage was super helpful for me. And I think it takes away some of the shame that sometimes people feel in a new parenting situation. I think we tend to be really hard on ourselves. And so, especially if you're going through something that to you feels unexpected, like you're like, I'm actually having a hard time bonding with my baby. This is actually a struggle for me. I thought I would instantly love my baby. Does this mean I'm a bad mom? If you're going through something, you're like, wow, I just didn't even know that this was possible to feel how I feel. Oftentimes, when you talk to other people who are in that same situation, they're like, actually, it wasn't all so easy for me too. Here's what helped me get through it. Here's how I got to the other side, or how I'm feeling. Because there is no one right way to feel. There is no one right experience to have. And even if the road is feeling bumpy, unexpected, different, it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. And I think hearing from other parents in these situations can make you feel like, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to feel the way I thought it was going to feel. This is an evolving situation. It's a journey. Many other people are going through what I'm going through. That helps so much. And so I think reaching out to our friends who have been parents and saying, do you have time for just like a 5-minute phone call? Because I need to vent and I need you to tell me that I'm not crazy. And just having somebody say that out loud to you, like just helps, I think, so much. And just tee it up that way. Be like, going through some stuff. Can we talk for 5 minutes? And I need you to tell me that I'm not crazy so people understand the assignment. And there may be like not giving direct advice, just like, yes, SOS, please come and support me. Like, or if you want advice, say that. Just be clear about what it is that you need. And I have always loved to show up for my friends and even my friends of friends in this regard. Like if you've had a particular birth situation or have gone through something more unusual, in my own health journeys, I've, maybe not talked to my own network of friends, but they're like, hey, I know somebody who went through that. And you're talking even to somebody who maybe you haven't met before, but even that level of support has been incredibly helpful to me in my own health journeys throughout my life. So,
I would say just give your body time. Do not prioritize exercise or anything like that in those first 6 weeks. Gentle muscle contractions and just doing your best to take care of your baby and get the sleep that you can is the most important thing. We, say to not exercise during those first 6 weeks, truly from a safety perspective. It's not that your body can't do it. It's that we want you to be safe. And so it's really, really important to not try to overexert yourself with exercise in those first 6 weeks. You're not only recovering from a birth, no matter how you delivered, you're also recovering from an entire pregnancy where your body was consistently changing for a really long amount of time. And that's not gonna, bounce back in 6 weeks. I hate the bounce back culture that our society has fostered because it's so not realistic. And I think anybody that's given birth will tell you that it doesn't take 6 weeks to recover from a pregnancy that was, nearly 10 months and a delivery. So just give your body grace and time and know that your body always has the capacity to build strength. So you don't have to do that in those first 6 weeks.
Dr. Meadows, there's a question in the chat. Michelle,
Yeah.
congratulations, had her baby April 30th, but she had a 3rd-degree tear. So she is wondering, when could she start pelvic floor therapy? Anything that you think that she could be doing now?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I absolutely think pelvic floor PT is a good thing for you to start. And, if you're about 4 weeks postpartum now, call and make an appointment now, because sometimes also at PT places, it can take a little bit of time for you to get an appointment. So I would call now so that you can at least be, on a wait list or on a list to have an appointment. There's, as we've been talking about, this kind of arbitrary rule of, 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks. And like everyone has said, that doesn't really mean anything. 6 weeks is a lot of times the time at which you might be cleared for activity. And so people have said that you shouldn't start PT until 6 weeks because of that, but you can certainly start PT before 6 weeks. We don't do any internal pelvic floor checks until you are cleared by your doctor. And that's the reason why people have the 6-week rule in their head. But just coming to PT doesn't mean that we have to do any internal work. You could come to PT the entire time and we could not do internal work. So know that just because we won't do that one piece of things doesn't mean there aren't other tools that we can give you to help. I think, like I mentioned before, the breathing is a really important piece of it. If you're, breathing through your activities instead of holding your breath, you release a lot of forced pressure down onto your pelvic floor. And so if you're not holding your breath, you're not increasing that pressure. So generally your pelvic floor is going to have some tension, especially if there was a tear. Your body tries to, protect that area that was injured. And that is very common, especially with a tear or vaginal delivery in general. And a lot of times also a cesarean delivery. But know that PT is a really, really good way to help address that and help teach you how to relax and lengthen your pelvic floor on your own. And I can kind of tie that into that next question that I saw too, that ways to prevent severe tearing during delivery if you're pregnant. So, the research is pretty mixed on perineal massage, but I teach it to a lot of my patients during birth prep because The point of perineal massage is not to stretch your vaginal opening to be as big as your baby's head, but it's to teach you how to lengthen and relax your pelvic floor and keep it relaxed in response to that stretching sensation that can be painful or uncomfortable. So having that motor control to be able to keep your pelvic floor lengthened and not have it reflexively contract and tighten when there's tension or stretch or pain can be really, really important and helpful. And so I think perineal massage is a great tool from that perspective to be able to kind of teach you how to keep everything lengthened. And then, hopefully easier not to tear if you're able to keep your pelvic floor lengthened. But I will say, from a PT perspective, there's not necessarily one magical tool that will 100% prevent tearing. I've had plenty of patients that didn't do perineal massage and didn't tear, and also plenty of patients who did do it and did tear. But know that as much as tearing feels really scary to people, it really isn't the worst thing. Like Dr. McLean said, the vagina usually does heal very well, and pelvic PTs are definitely here to help you on the other side, especially when you're trying to return to things like sex. I loved so much that Dr. Orick said, while you're addressing any sort of painful penetration, it doesn't exclude you from participating in sex. Sex does not always have to include penetration. And so there can be a lot of ways to be able to connect and be intimate with your partner without penetration. So know that if you're working on it, if you're going to PT, it doesn't mean that you can't engage in sex at all.
Thank you. Yeah, I just dropped in the chat. There's also an event on Friday. Let's get ready to have a baby. Pelvic Floor PT's Guide to Birth Prep. So, Sophia, I know that you are on your phone, but in case you are able to tune into the app, check that out. I want to definitely ask Dr. McLean and Dr. Orick this next question that had come through. How long is the optimal time to wait between pregnancies? You kind of talked about that early with, oops, surprise, somebody gets pregnant within that 6-week period, but both mentally and physically, what would you all say?
From the physical perspective, there's a lot of research that suggests waiting at least 18 months, but more ideally 24 plus months in between pregnancies is ideal from that recovery perspective. Because as Dr. Orrick had mentioned, I think that this postpartum recovery process extends a lot longer than people think it does. And so giving your body that time in particular to replete nutritional stores and get ready for another pregnancy, if you're able to wait 2 years, that's fantastic. That being said, there are many folks who just don't have the luxury of that time, whether that's because they've waited a little bit longer to begin trying to have children. They're like, well, if I wait another 2 years, I'm going to be 40 and it's going to be much harder to get pregnant. I think then talking with your provider about that makes a lot of sense in figuring out what's going to be best for your body, because there are other factors that also matter. For example, if you had a C-section birth with your first birth, then that recovery period and when it's safe to become pregnant next might be longer than if you've had a vaginal birth. And sometimes it can depend on the type of C-section that you've had, like where they've put the incision on the uterus. There are just these factors that can come into, is there risk associated with a pregnancy sooner than 18 to 24 months? And what does that risk potentially look like? I think it's great to address that with your provider if you can't wait that duration, or it's not optimal, from your family planning perspective to wait that duration.
Yeah, I think I'd echo those points of like everyone doesn't have the luxury. Also, if you become pregnant or you're kind of shortening your time, I had children 13 months apart, actually C-sections. And listen, I think every body is different. A planned C-section, which I had, is very different from an emergency C-section with a lot of different complications. So I think I just hope people who are having kids a little bit closer together don't feel guilty. Everybody is different. If you have the luxury to ask, right, and you didn't become pregnant accidentally, certainly do that. But I think everybody's going to be different. And again, if you're kind of considering, can I get pregnant spontaneously or IVF, you may run into other complications, and IVF pregnancies tend to have more complications. So it's a really interesting mix. But yes, if you're 40 and then you're going to wait till you're 43, that's going to probably get you into some dicey space. And yeah, I would say, for us having babies in late 30s, 40s, it's a difficult conversation, especially if you want more than one child.
Right, thank you. So we are at time. I know that there was one question that came through in the chat. Dr. Meadows, I don't know if you wanted to answer Lisa maybe through the app later. But I just want to be respectful of all of our speakers' time. Thank you so, so much for sharing your expertise and just your honesty and just normalizing that, we can't do this alone. To every parent joining us, your mind, your body, your needs, they all matter. We hope that this conversation leaves you feeling seen and supported, whether it's your first pregnancy or, you've had multiples already. If you haven't yet, come find us in the Auggie community, the app. A lot of the things that we talked about, like doulas, people are looking for recommendations in their area. It's such a wonderful community. And I've just really appreciated feeling supported this pregnancy with that. So just want to close out our conversation today. Take care, everybody, and anybody who is expecting soon. I hope everything goes smoothly. And those of you in the postpartum period now, I hope that you just are walking away feeling even more supported, knowing different ways that you can ask for help. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.